Happy birthday, hello Whitefish! We are officially 1 year old. And to celebrate, Hello Whitefish is partnering with Thunderheart Films and Deliver Fund to present the award-winning documentary Bring Them Home at the Waccholz College Center on August 29th, narrated by Academy Award-nominated Blackfeet and Nez Perce actor Lily Gladstone. Bring Them Home tells the inspiring story of a small group of Blackfoot people and their mission to establish the first wild buffalo herd on their ancestral territory near Glacier Park since the species near extinction a century ago. There will be some very special guest performances before the film we will be announcing soon. Today's guest is an old high school friend of mine named Melissa Arnot-Reid. She is a mountain guide, athlete, professional speaker, and has summited Mt Everest 6 times. And if that wasn't enough, last time she did it without supplemental oxygen, making her the first American woman in history to successfully do so. I'm getting winded just thinking about it. Known as a determined and hardworking and enthusiastic teacher, Melissa has devoted her life to learning from the mountains and sharing that knowledge with others. She is also the co-founder of the Juniper Fund, which provides financial support to families of local workers killed while working in the mountains of Nepal. Her and her husband are professional guides, so if you're interested in some life-changing adventures, check out the links in the description below. Today's episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. If you would like to help support the fight against human trafficking, visit thriverscoffee.com to order your coffee and make a difference today. Melissa, how are you?
I am very well. I'm so excited to be able to see you and chat with you.
Totally. This is so wild.
It's crazy.
After all these years, it's kind of fun just to kind of see where everyone's at in life.
Yeah.
But you kind of have taken the ball and ran with it in a way that what's really interesting is our friend group growing up was pretty dynamic. Just it's kind of funny because literally the last time I remember hanging out with you was we were smoking Camels at City Beach. And then the next thing I hear, you summited Everest 6 times.
Yeah.
And you did it without oxygen.
Yeah.
That is so gnarly, Melissa. What the heck happened between us hanging out in high school at City Beach to you going to Everest? That is so effing wild.
Yeah, it's totally wild. I think, for many people, high school is such a strange time, and it's such a fight to try to figure out who you are and where you belong. And for me, it was particularly kind of a challenging time because I moved to Whitefish in 7th grade, and that was a real weird time to join a new school. And I had found these little islands of safety and comfort, and you were definitely one of them. And It was kind of the idea of finding your people who just really get you and don't need much from you. But I was honestly really struggling. I had a lot kind of going on in my young life. And so I left high school early. I got my GED, and I went on sort of what became a journey to try to find out who in the heck I was.
Yeah.
And really early on, as luck would have it, I got a chance to go climbing, and it really shifted my perspective. I'd always been really athletic, but I'd never been very competitive. And so I was really repelled by team sports and real competitive activities. I just failed in that. And, but I really had a desire to push myself and, see what my body could do. And so I started climbing, and I felt a sense of freedom and belonging that I really needed and craved. And so I, grew up in a relatively economically scarce family. And so I didn't have the opportunity to go travel and, backpack through Europe or anything. But I wanted to see as much of the world as I could. So I knew I would have to work to do that. And I became a mountain guide when I was 21. And that opened the door for me to both learn in some incredible mentorship, which I was deeply craving, and also, the opportunity to travel the world. And I really loved it. I really dedicated myself to everything about climbing. I kind of simultaneously pursued emergency medicine, was working on the ambulance as well, and teaching wilderness medicine. And I just made it my job. And within a few years, I got the chance to be an assistant guide on Everest. And that was 2008. Yeah. And I spent the next 10 years working on Everest, which was incredible.
That is incredible. Coming from,
kind of a random.
going from, big mountain. And I think if you were really adventurous, you could go climb Great Northern, which
That was my first peak that I climbed.
Really? Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was something that I had left Montana as, my parents really wanted my sister and I to like live in the back of our car and ski all year and just like not work for the man. And so I have said all children rebel. And I did by going to first Portland and then I moved to Iowa. And like my father's heart was broken. He's like, I raised you in the mountains and you moved to Iowa? What are you doing? But I sort of had to do that to be able to actually, I wouldn't have seen the mountains the same if I hadn't left. And I worked with a guy in Iowa who grew up in Iowa and had spent his like early 20s climbing in Glacier National Park. And I was like, wait, I grew up in Glacier National Park. And it really changed my perspective of, I knew there were some friends in high school. My sister kind of was peripheral to those friends that were climbing and more of like the like outdoorsy crew, but that felt not accessible to me. I didn't feel like I belonged with those folks necessarily. But I really saw it different in Iowa, and I came back to Montana, and I cried real tears when I saw the mountains. Like, I really saw them for the first time. And a friend was going to go climb the Great Northern with his parents, and so I was really intimidated, but I was like, his parents are old, and so this is fine, I can do this. And it turns out his parents were like, our age now.
Right.
They weren't old. Yep. And they had been spending their life climbing and peak bagging, and they were far more prepared than I was, and I was incredibly humbled, but it was a super transformative experience for me.
Oh, that's crazy. I mean, Great Northern is definitely like that's a gnarly peak to do. I did it once in my early 20s, and it's pretty intimidating. Like, it definitely humbles you. Like, that's like kind of straight up.
Yeah, and I think I just was like, naive. I didn't know fully what I was getting into, but I also had come back to Montana that summer, and I had like a couple $1,000s saved up and a serious intention to say yes to things that kind of felt uncomfortable, so I could maybe further find who I was, and at that point I was like 19, and coming back to Montana felt like sort of failing in a weird way because I just had wanted nothing more than to leave. But it was just such an amazing and profound experience to see something that I thought I knew really well with a totally different perspective. And so I was lucky that I ended up in that on that climb, and also it was really humbling. But I got to the summit and I felt this really profound feeling that I have continued to feel in the mountains, which is a sense of both like pride and humility really colliding with one another. This knowledge that you've done something under your own power and that you're capable of so much, but also this really deep understanding that like nature is ultimately the power. Like no matter how much you do, no matter what mountains you climb, like Great Northern doesn't care that I've never climbed a mountain. And now if I go back, Great Northern doesn't care that I climbed Everest 6 times. Like there's a real humility in that. And it was, it really shifted something really deep inside of me and told me like, pursue this path, and the world could open up to you, and it certainly has.
Oh, and when you're on the top of a mountain like that, like nothing else matters. Any drama, the rest of the world is just, it's so far below you. And it's just really, I mean, I can't even imagine what it's like to get to the top of Everest. And just to kind of compare, I was like looking at some numbers. So I think like Great Northern is an elevation gain of 4,776. Big Mountain's only 2,200. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Everest is like 11,431 feet elevation gain from base camp.
Yeah, from base camp.
Gnarly.
And you have to like to base camp as well. Or if you're in China, you can drive there. But yeah, it's both like totally different and similar. Like everything, no mountain is climbed in any more than one step at a time. Like welcome to the cliches of climbing. I'll say probably accidentally many of them, but it's really, really true. Like whether it's 11,000 feet or 1,000 feet or 50 feet, it's only done one step at a time. And there's something really wonderful about that. And just what you were saying, like in the mountains, I have found, I am a really like active brain person. I have lots of things going on in my head all at the same time. And I can be like really outgoing and really extroverted, but I also need a lot of solitude and a lot of reflection. And the mountains have always given me this opportunity to be surrounded by something as big as nature, the biggest thing in existence in my mind. And also really, really present. Like all I can do is what's right in front of me. So it's, boundary of what I can think is confined by what I can do right now. And there's something really profound about that. And I've experienced it, on really small hikes, and I've experienced it in the big mountains. And and there's something so amazing and healing, I think, for all people. I've experienced it. I work as a guide, so I take folks into the mountains. I share that experience with them. And one of the things that I have found is most resonant for people is this knowledge that you are capable. And that's, I think, why we're drawn towards difficult things. We've created a life and a society as times have evolved where we are really swaddled in a tremendous amount of comfort. And so now we seek discomfort as a recreation, which is sort of like, 100 years ago, like our grandparents would just be shaking their heads at us. Like, if you want discomfort,
right.
Live in my... You don't need to go pay money to make yourself uncomfortable. You could just live. But we've made our lives so comfortable that we seek discomfort to prove that we are capable. And I do it too. And it's a salve to just knowing that you can endure things, and hard things make you stronger.
That's so interesting. I was just watching this video clip between David Goggins and Andrew Huberman where they're talking about a part of the brain that I think is attached to willpower, where when you push yourself, in that way where you're doing something you don't want to do that's uncomfortable, that it actually grows a part of your brain that actually develops better willpower. And so I wonder if it's just kind of in our primordial human nature to want to get back to it. I wonder why, or if that's why during COVID, so many people wanted to move out of the cities and the suburbs and move to the mountains, just kind of this wanting to reclaim something primordial.
Yeah, and I think that, I always tell folks who are interested in challenging themselves, I always tell them to get a discomfort practice in their life. And I think it's really important. It's something, on a really extreme level, the Navy SEALs do it in a really extreme way. And for me, training to climb Everest without oxygen, I did it also in a really extreme way. But it's basically, it can be as simple as right now I feel a little warm. I'm not going to change my temperature. I'm not going to take my jacket off. I'm not going to change the temperature of the house. I'm just going to sit. And I'm going to be a little uncomfortable, and I'm going to survive it. And I'm going to know that I can survive discomfort. And, you can take that to extremes where it's a lot of people do it through physical activity. It's kind of the running. It's knowing that you can continue while being uncomfortable. But I think it is really powerful, and I do think it connects to a very primordial sense of knowledge of survival, knowing that you do not need things to be perfect, because no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what you've been through, you have discomfort in front of you. It is coming in your life. You will not be able to avoid it. And so to have a practice where you are a little bit more resilient and you can endure discomfort and not like it doesn't make you like it. I don't like being uncomfortable, but I really know I can endure it.
That's so fascinating. So kind of taking that to the extreme of approaching a mountain like Everest, which I'm pretty ignorant about, so I'm going to ask you probably some super dumb questions.
I love that.
What is the experience of climbing Mount Everest like? And I'm sure you kind of probably approach it a lot with so much different experience because you have paramedic experience, so you kind of understand the physiological effects that's going to have on your body. So what is that experience like climbing Mount Everest?
I think there's a lot of different ways to view the experience. I think physically, if you start there, you arrive at you can climb Everest from a couple different routes, from Nepal or from the Chinese Tibetan side, but roughly the base camp elevations are the same. They're around 17,000 feet. And so once you get to that elevation, your body really is starting to kind of survive on itself. You're not really processing, you're not growing at all. You're sort of degrading. And that is palpable when you're climbing Everest. Things are harder. It's hard, you're short of breath. You notice that you can eat as much food as you possibly eat, but you are still going to lose weight. You're losing muscle mass, and everything is harder, but it's also really one of the most exceptional places, I think, climbing above 8,000 meters in general, because you get this opportunity to actually watch your body adjust to that altitude. And it's really noticeable if you use something fixed like time. So, the first time you climb up to Camp 1, it could take 5 or 6 hours to get through the Khumbu Icefall and solve that puzzle. And then physically as well, you just are short of breath. It's tiring. Your muscles feel really fatigued. You rest, you hang out up there, you let your body adjust to altitude, then you come back down, rest at base camp and actually re-nourish yourself. And then the next time you go up, you can feel that it's easier, and you can measure that it's easier because maybe it's only 4.5 hours to get through that same section. And nothing changed profoundly, except that your body adjusted. And so I think a misnomer that folks don't necessarily understand is a typical Everest expedition takes about 60 days from start to finish, and you will almost climb the mountain 3 times just to get to the summit once, all to allow your body those little adjustments to altitude. And now folks currently these days are using like pre-acclimatization tents to sleep in at home that have some benefit, but the truth is, if you want that benefit of truly adjusting to the altitude, you need to go to that altitude, feel it, be kind of uncomfortable, come back down, rest, recover, nourish, and then go back up with the benefit of having adjusted. But it feels a little bit like silly and dying at the same time. It's like, it's a really, I often say like, there's probably far more fun ways to make yourself feel that bad. But I chose mountain climbing.
Yeah, that's incredible. Hey friends, I want to take less than a minute to tell you about an awesome product I use called Go Pills by a company called Military Nootropics. Go Pills are a blend of 8 nootropic neurochargers that support focus, clarity, attention, fast recall, and decision making. I've actually been using these for a long time now, and I love these things. I take them before every interview to keep me focused and to support my brain health. These have actually been tested by some of the US military's top special operators who have given rave reviews to Go Pills. And I wouldn't be promoting this awesome company if I didn't believe in this product myself. You can get 15% off your order when you use the code HELLO15 at checkout when you visit gopills.com. Now back to the interview. What's the view like at the peak? Because if I understand, like you can't really like hang out too much. Like you kind of get up there, you hang out, and then you have to kind of start making your way down. Is that kind of true?
Yeah, I've been really, I think you see a lot, and especially right now, currently, the summit pushes are on Everest. So Everest is going to be in the news. And you see a lot about like the crowds of people. In the years that I was there was certainly times where the peak was, quote unquote crowded, but I personally never climbed on any of those really crowded days. I've been always pretty strategic. And because of that, I've benefited to be able to stay at the summit for sort of as long as like our oxygen supply would allow us to. So I've been on the summit of Everest for up to an hour on a couple of my climbs. Yeah. And the first time I was there, I remember just thinking like, take it, it's sort of like anything amazing. You want to like soak it all in because it's fleeting and you may never experience it again. And wanting to soak it in sort of like makes you resistant to being able to soak it in because you're desiring it. You're like seeking to like absorb it. And I felt that, and I really felt like, okay, I have to just go back. Like I couldn't have possibly soaked it in. And I always have said, I think one time doing something is an experience, and twice is perspective. And I think perspective is sort of what I'm in pursuit of in my life. And so I've always wanted to do most things I've done like more than once. I'm weirdly repetitive animal, but I really like that point of comparison. And on the summit itself, it's like, you can see it's really a contrast. So you can look out into Nepal and you can see 7,000 meter peaks that have been towering over 26,000 foot ridges, 24,000 foot ridges above your head for the entire expedition, and now you're above them. And then you look out into Tibet and it's a tundra. It's like a desert, and it just, you can see where the snow line stops at the base of the mountains, and there's this wild expanse, and, flat earthers, please don't come for me, but like you can see the curve of the earth, or maybe it's like an optical trick. I accidentally said something on YouTube, and I've been paying for it.
Hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really profound. And the summit is, again, welcome to the cliche land, but like the summit is halfway. And so while I've always been able to like appreciate the beauty and the enormity of where I am, it also feels tense and like urgent in a way to get down. I don't want to stay there. The summit is not where I want to forever be. And it feels like, on the like mystical side, I think it feels really close. The thinness of the air, I think, puts you in the presence of like, it's probably just the oxygen deprivation, but it feels like you're in the presence of like all of the spirits in the world all at once. Like it just feels really full.
Wow.
And that is a really unique feeling that I've only really felt up high. Again, probably like oxygen deprivation, but also I like to believe like, you're closer to whatever is beyond this life.
Totally, literally at the edge of the rest of the universe. Like about as close as a
Yeah,
human can walk to being at the edge of space.
Yeah, and survive.
And survive.
Yeah.
Wild. And with that in mind, it's some people don't survive that hike. Like I was kind of really shocked when I saw like how many people have perished since people started recording. It's like over 300.
Yeah. And there's a multitude of sort of ways you can die on Everest. You can have an accident where you fall, ice and rock can fall onto you, avalanches, exposure for a lot of folks, either exposure to the cold or exposure to altitude, sudden physiological death like heart attack, stroke, something like that. You're really, really vulnerable and you're really asking a lot of your body. And in this moment in life, because of social media, for better or worse, like there's a lot of visibility onto, well, first I think like the book Into Thin Air and the 1996 tragedy really shifted. John Krakauer is really well known for saying that he thought his book would deter people from going to Everest because he was writing about this like profound tragedy that happened that was just horrific, and it had the opposite effect. Like people were really drawn towards Everest after that book, and we've continued to kind of see the same thing happen where folks maybe have like an inkling of, I wonder if I could climb. And especially like I've experienced, because of who I am and the container that I exist in, people often see me, I'm 5'3", I weigh 125 pounds. I'm like a pretty feminine girl. And especially when I started, I was 24. And people would size me up and say, oh, if she can climb Everest and I can climb Everest. And one thing that I've come to know, especially through guiding, is like, and it's really helpful in life because it's true in every area of life, but we can't look at people and know what they're capable of. We can't look at people and see what life experience they're carrying or actual experience. And so there's this misnomer, and social media has like perpetuated that to the max. And so there are far more people climbing right now that have less experience. And I do think that I'm not going to be a person to try to gatekeep Everest. I've been there, so it'd be really unfair of me to say like, you shouldn't go to Everest. But I do feel that like we should respect the things we do, and how we respect it is by getting a profound amount of experience, being really capable of not being a liability, barring an accident happening, but trying to not be a liability. And I feel scared saying that in some ways because, for me, the pursuit of climbing without supplemental oxygen, there's such a high risk of becoming a liability. So I really had to be very clear on why I was doing it, and very clear on what my boundaries were of what I would accept so that I wouldn't become that liability. But obviously, huge unknown, and that's a curious thing for a lot of people.
So which attempt was it when you did Everest without oxygen? How many times have you climbed it before that? So
it was my last climb, which was in 2016.
Okay.
So I had summited 5 times. I'd been on the mountain for 8 years. I'd had a number of years where I didn't summit. And I'd had a couple of years where I'd had a couple of seasons where it was my intention to climb without oxygen, but circumstances shifted and I didn't even really try. I had one year in 2010 where I truly tried to climb without oxygen, and I truly failed to climb without oxygen. I put on an oxygen mask and I went to the summit, and that was my 3rd summit of the peak. And I had, this rising sort of accolade around, being a foreign female, having a lot of summits of Everest, being pretty young. I had sponsors, and it seemed like, I was just on this pedestal of success. But for me, it felt like failure, because that was something I really wanted, was to pursue, can I climb without oxygen? And I failed at doing that. And so it was a question in my mind. And in the years between 2010 and 2016, I experienced a tremendous amount of loss in the mountains, specifically on Everest. 2013 was a very strange year. There was a fight that broke out at Camp 2 on Everest, and it was between local workers and some foreign climbers, and I was friends with both of the sides, and I ended up in the middle of it, and it was a very bizarre feeling and a very strange moment in time, for sure. And the next year, a devastating avalanche happened in the Khumbu Icefall, and 16 local workers were killed. Oh. And it was, a loss of life in that scale, you really don't see outside of like wartime or natural disasters. And the season didn't continue, and there was a lot of personal questions around, the ridiculousness of exposing, especially local workers, to this risk. And then the following year in 2015, there was a devastating earthquake at the end of April in the country of Nepal and killed over 10,000 people in the country. People died at base camp. And it's for me, my personal life was also sort of like falling apart in many ways. I had been using the mountains for an escape from sort of facing myself and facing some of the deeper challenges that I had been running away from since I was in high school, since probably like sitting on the dock at Whitefish Beach smoking Camel Lights. I was exchanging one escape for another.
Yeah.
And after the earthquake, I had to really face like some serious questions about the risk and the reason and why I was there and what my purpose was and what I was trying to do. I was also working, so I was making my living doing that. So it was pretty complicated. And, I'd like to think I could do other jobs too, but I'd invested a lot in this as my job. And so I changed my motivations a lot. I changed some of the strategy of how I wanted to exist on Everest. And I went actually outside of Nepal to the Tibetan side, the Chinese side of Everest, and climbed in a really different way when I did ultimately succeed without oxygen. And I would say it took all of my life of years up to that point to be able to have that success. And it also took so much luck. I got really lucky in many ways, whether no natural disasters, no other external circumstances.
Wow. So I remember reading you kind of went radio silent on social media. You kind of did this secret back route. It kind of sounds like, so there's multiple ways to go up Everest. Is this kind of like a way only a few people knew about, or was it just kind of like, was it more just because you just didn't want the exposure and it was more personal?
Yeah, it was kind of multifaceted for me. So far fewer climbers climb from the Tibetan side, partly because it's tricky to get into Tibet. It's, since 2008, the regulations and access to Tibet for foreigners has been tricky. So it's far easier to get into Nepal. I imagined in my brain that I would succeed in Nepal because I intimately knew that route. I had spent 8 years on that route. But as things unfolded and I decided, I really distilled down why did I want to do this? Because I can be really honest and say that when I first concepted the idea of climbing without oxygen, it was for validation. I wanted people to say, you're good enough, you belong here, you're a mountain climber, you're not just, I think especially being a young girl, people were like, oh, is she even a mountain guide? Does she even belong? And I still get that. And I don't know what else I can do. I'm I literally have dedicated 20 years of my life to this. But I wanted to prove that I was capable, and it would be really irrefutable if I climbed without oxygen. But as I started to experience those losses, it was okay, is being validated and death as a consequence of that, is that worth it? And that equation felt really askew for me. And I dug a little deeper down and really aligned myself with my values. And one of my values, and maybe you'll remember this because this has been a really defining part of my personality, is a really obnoxious curiosity. I question everything, and in all of the ways, I need to go 360 degrees around every problem in my head and really understand it. And part of climbing without oxygen was a pursuit of curiosity about myself. It wasn't to go and do this and prove anything. It was this question of, can I do this? Is this something that somebody as average as me is capable of? And if the answer is no, I can accept that answer. And I hadn't really thought about it that way prior to 2016. I had to shift my thinking. It was I'm not going to get to the summit. I'm going to get to an answer. And I want to answer this question. And then I didn't climb with any official support of local workers. So I've been feeling really conflicted about the how local workers are utilized, but also how it benefits their livelihood. I had all these really close relationships. I'd seen really close people die. I had an expedition with a local worker, a Sherpa, that I was climbing with, who died, and it changed so much of my life. I started a nonprofit to help support the families of workers after they die, and that's become an enormous part of what I do now. But I knew I wanted to be have a light footprint, and I had just gotten divorced, and I had a new boyfriend, and so he wanted to climb Everest. He was a mountain guide, not an accountant, so that's a fairly important thing of not just taking a boyfriend to Everest. But he really was interested in having us both have the same new experience together, and the North Side would provide that. So that was part of it. And then I also started to realize that if somebody said, made a comment on social media and said, there literally, which people did, saying, oh, there's no way she can do it, that would live inside of me. And then I have to ask myself, like, why is some, Joe from Milwaukee's opinion of me more important than my opinion of me? Because Joe doesn't know me and I do know me. And that's what this is actually about, is even knowing me more. And so I really just decided to shut down and just close off, because I wanted to just be present and really in pursuit of this and really clarify my goal. And so that I was really clear that I wasn't there for it, because validation is like an easy trap for us all to fall into. Like, we all can fall into it very easily. I did not like evolve above it now. I like can just as easily, I mean, Joe from Milwaukee can haunt me tomorrow if he wants to. Like, not above it, So I wanted to be really clear. And part of that was, being kind of hidden about it. And I told a few lies to folks saying I wasn't going to be on Everest. And then I knew if I was on the north side, I wouldn't be as visible. Not as many folks would see us. And it ended up all coming together in a really beautiful way.
Damn. And that's so extraordinary when you kind of say, like, the risk of death is truly comparable to a wartime situation, and to have experienced some of the biggest tragedies on Everest. And I really wanted to ask you about that. So the nonprofit you started is called the Juniper Fund. And can you kind of like walk us through who the locals are, who the Sherpas are? They seem like they are just extraordinarily conditioned to these mountains. Can you kind of tell their story a little bit for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've probably noticed already that I haven't used the word Sherpa very frequently. I keep saying local worker. And I say that because there's a really important distinction. In our language, we use Sherpa, like lowercase s, as to talk about a load carrier. But Sherpa is actually a capital S. It's a tribe of people. It's a last name. And it means, people from the east that migrated from Tibet into Nepal. And so there's many different Sherpa tribes. And they tend to be the traditional and historic high altitude workers tended to be all in the Sherpa tribe. So all of the workers would have the last name Sherpa, and they would be doing a variety of jobs, from like base camp support to portering to being mountain guides. And now, in the evolution of time and how travel has changed and just like the modernization of everything, there's also folks who are local workers who aren't from the Sherpa tribe. They're from different tribes in Nepal, so Nepali people in general. But Sherpa specifically are really like physiologically adept at being at very high altitude. And scientists have researched this forever, and they found that it's on a like mitochondrial level. It's a cellular thing. It's very hard to measure like why they do so much better at altitude. And then there's also this like necessity, right? So these are people that live in really harsh terrain, high altitude mountainous areas, and in the like colonialism and like times of British in the 20s, 100 years ago, they would take work on expeditions, and really physically demanding work, and then slowly starting to climb, learn about climbing. And now, current day, 100 years later, it's been super amazing to watch, because a lot of folks, I'd say there's a split of mountain workers. So there's folks that are maybe not traditionally educated in school. They live in really rural, remote areas and have like a pretty high level of poverty. The country of Nepal is really fairly poor. And they have taken mountain work and physical labor because that's what's most available to them. And then there's this whole other rising, expanding contingent of mountain workers that are just the same as me. They grew up with a traditional education, had some means, could live in Kathmandu if they wanted to, could travel outside, but they love the mountains, and they have learned a craft, protected a craft, and become mountain guides or, high altitude porters or various roles and skills. But how foreigners have utilized local workers is sometimes, I think, because of a language barrier and a romanticization of like native people. They've used them in a way that has been more of a tool than a partner, historically speaking. And I really appreciate that visibility is changing that, and that's some of the positive sides of social media, is that folks are becoming more visible. It's really challenging with Sherpa people because in general they are named after the day of the week they're born, and then their last name is Sherpa. So like in general, there's just 7 names of people. Oh, wow. So it can be really confusing and make people seem like even more anonymous than they are as individuals. But in my work in Nepal, I very quickly recognized that these are individuals, these are people. I dedicated myself to like trying to learn the language, which was really fun because I got taught to say a lot of really bad words, thinking I was saying good words early on. I formed some close friendships. And so I had a close friendship with Chuang Nima Sherpa, who is the climbing partner I referenced, who died on an expedition that we were on together. And he was on a cornice that collapsed and he was swept away. And this was in 2010. And he had 2 sons that were 11 and 13 and a wife. And I think for me, like, I'd been dealing with, rescues and things, but never on my expedition. And I'd always felt like sort of, I think like we all do until tragedy touches us, I'd felt like somewhat immune to it and just out of pure naivety. And it changed my life so much. And I really wanted to dedicate myself to being able to provide some support for his family in whatever ways I could. And I was able to do that. And over the years, I saw some shifts happening. And I formed a really close relationship with his sons and kept in like incredibly close contact with them. And, now they're like in their mid-20s. His younger son, Lakpa, lives in Seattle, graduated from Seattle Pacific University last year. And it's just, they're 2 amazing kids. His other son, Geljan, lives in the UK, is going to a master's program there. And his mom, I've kept in really close contact with her. And our relationship has evolved over the years. And I've gotten to see her and how having some support benefited her. So I knew I wanted to provide that support for others, but also like being a mountain guide is not a high paying job. And so I knew I couldn't like personally support the families. So I founded this nonprofit with my climbing partner, Dave Morton, in 2012. It's called the Juniper Fund. You can look at thejuniperfund.org to learn more. But the essential thing that we do is we provide a tiered program of support for any of the families of high altitude workers who are killed while working in the mountains in Nepal. And so what we do is we provide a cash grant, and it's spaced out over time. So we pay them, a continuous cash grant for 5 years, and it totals $20,000, which is about equivalent to their life insurance. It's a little bit more. So we try to double their life insurance and spread it out so that they don't just get an influx of money right away. And then that has a propensity to go quite quickly. And then we also provide opportunities for vocational training, such as like business management, restaurant training, language classes, taxi driver, whatever they want. We don't set classes. They just tell us what they want. And that's available to like any of the family members of someone who's died. And then we provide business grants if folks want to start a business or need a loan to buy an extra yak for their yak herding business or whatever it is. And then recently we've started providing some like community and wraparound support where we bring together family members that have similar things in their life, whether it's like widows who all have kids between the ages of 3 and 10, bring them together because they share a really unique, horrible experience, but they can connect on that. And it's been really profoundly impactful for me to work with the Juniper Fund. And it's a huge part of what I do. I spend a lot of time fundraising and going over to Nepal and connecting with the families and like always asking how we can be better and support them. And I feel it's really important as a person who's benefited from the high mountains in Nepal to be able to like be quite aware of how not I can give back, but how I can fulfill an obligation inside of this relationship so that it humanizes these people who have so often been just like tokenized.
Wow, that's so profound.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's more important than anything I've done, and I appreciate you asking about it because it's like, I really had this feeling of if I could, because after Chuang died, I continued to this pursuit of trying to climb without oxygen, and before he died, I didn't have this idea of like what would I do with this accomplishment that I got, besides just like feel good about myself for a minute. And after he died, I had this really strong feeling that if I was able to succeed with doing this, I would want to turn the attention that came onto me to benefit the community in like, not, outwardly in his honor, because the fund's not named after him or something like that, but really like internally to just say that like, if I can receive some attention other than just making my ego feel good and making me feel special and different, like we all want, can I also like turn the spotlight on to helping people who have like really helped me?
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, that's just so important when you're visiting a foreign land. I just think of like all the tourists that come here and how that impacts like the native communities, the tribal communities around here. There's like a lot of Blackfeet guides who are coming up through the ranks and stuff, and just like being able to show them support for their ancestral lands. This land is really, like whether it be Everest or here, it's like you got to really honor the local culture. And that's incredible that you've been able to do that. I mean, God, just like the profound loss of just nature just taking its course, and there's just nothing you can do in those situations is got to be a very helpless feeling when it's just so sudden like that.
Yeah, I think that like I am asked this question, and I feel this like slight personal conflict at times around, you can't, these are preventable deaths, right? Because you don't have to go climb mountains. Like it is not necessary. We're not, evolving societies by climbing mountains. It's like a tremendously selfish pursuit. And I've come to think in the 20 years of this really selfish pursuit of my own, I've come to think that just being okay with a selfish pursuit is something that probably does benefit societies, and I think that we lie when we say like, we're not doing something selfishly, because so much of what we do is so selfish, of course, like it's our, intrinsic desire to exist in the world. But to just do something that, for me, and I guess I should speak to myself, but it's something that has provided me with a type of grounding and a type of purpose and a type of focus that has changed my perspective. It's opened my eyes in ways, and not just the travel and not just the like interaction with, people, but just the interaction with nature has shifted so deeply inside of me something that I do feel has created a positive ripple. And I do feel that like the person that I would be otherwise, like I definitely could just be sleeping on the dock at Whitefish Lake and smoking Camel Lights, which like props if that is your jam. But I don't know that I would be as contributing to, like I like to think that being a happy person in the world actually has a really big benefit on the world overall. And so doing what makes you happy, even if it is selfish and has risk, it actually somehow makes it like even more valuable to me, because it's not easy. It's not something that if it was easy, it probably would have very little meaning. It's challenging, and it has risk. And, I have 2 kids, and I get a lot of feedback from the internet on being a person who climbs mountains with young kids. And I can assure you that no matter how much you have thought about whether or not I should climb mountains with young kids, I have thought about it far more. And I have been really intentional. I waited until I was a little bit older to have kids. And I didn't have like a whatever strategy I had just, went out the window because of life. Yeah. But I really wanted to be an older parent, I think. I had parents that were younger, and I could now really deeply appreciate, like, thank God 23-year-old Melissa did not have children, because that would be so some really important things happened in the interceding time of that 10 years.
Same.
But, yeah, I know. I see other folks like yourself that have, that are our age with young kids. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I just know your kid is so benefiting from your growing up.
Totally.
Trying to 100%. Grow up with them. Like, it's wild. So I'm really grateful for that. But I'm also a person who is like, my job isn't to go climb mountains solo so much. My job is to protect other people's safety in the mountains. So I am constantly considering risk, and it's not theoretical to me anymore, right? I've experienced loss in the mountains. I'm very aware of what the risks are, and I choose to interact with the mountains in ways that feel like an acceptable level of risk. Nice. I haven't gone back to Everest since I had kids, and that's partly because my kids are small, and time is a thief when they're little. It goes so fast, and I want to spend really close time with them, but I have brought both my kids to Nepal multiple times when I was working, and I have the intention of introducing them to the school there, where they will be able to spend a month out of every year going to that school while I'm working, and also just interacting with the culture and the close families that I've become really close with. And, I don't know, I can't say how it will all evolve, but what I can say is that, like, I see parents doing crazy things every week in the town I live in that is not climbing mountains, that is far more risky than anything I'm doing.
Sure.
It's not a comparison. Like, we all are just doing our best, theoretically surviving. But, I have to answer the question, because folks are always very concerned about this self-centered risk I'm taking. And I try to reassure them that, like, I don't know how to explain this, but it's not, I haven't not thought about it.
Yeah, first woman to summit Everest with their kid on their back. I mean, that hasn't been done, right?
No, and honestly, so that's actually a really good point. I have interacted through my life with parents of young kids who want to take their kids along on big adventures, and I've always felt really strongly about very young kids, like under the age of 12. I think it's really unfair to put them in scenarios where there is objective hazard because they can't actually understand it. And so you can't say they're choosing. I mean, it is a prisoner situation. And I guess as parents, that's a prisoner situation. We choose all the things for our kids for so long, until they break free of the prison. But I do think that, like, my kids, I was just lamenting how, like, my son is almost 2 and he's never slept in a tent. My daughter's 6. She slept in a tent like one time. I'm not the parent. My husband is a professional skier, and
Nice.
we're not like hucking cliffs with our kids.
Yeah.
And it's just different. We just have a different perspective in the world. I think it's like, I really want my kids to find joy, and I really want them to pursue. And it's amazing. Like, you are starting to, I'm sure, see you are the biggest influence on your kids. Like, my daughter says all the time that she wants to climb Mount Everest when she grows up as her job, and that she's, yeah. And I'm like, why? And she goes, because I want to go to work with you, Mama. And it's like, okay. And it's sweet, but I'm very thoughtful about it. And it's not, I'm definitely not parenting for the gram, and I'm not like doing the things that I'm doing anymore for that just external notion. I'd rather like have these deeper relationships and connections.
Yeah, and just start small, like one step at a time. It's a really good philosophy, and just kind of starting small and stuff, and just not scaring your kids or thinking that doing extreme things is normal.
No. Yeah, it's wild. The town we live in, there's a couple of other folks here who are mountain guides who have climbed Everest. So I think like the Montessori school kids think that like everyone's parents have climbed Everest, because we've done like a couple presentations there, and it's going to be a weird realization as they get older.
Right.
Go out into the world. Oh, that's not the normal thing that people do.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Oh, just growing up in Montana, like when I moved to California and was just kind of living more in the cities, and people would be like, so where's Montana again? And like, what do you guys do up there? And, it's explaining, it got bees, and, sometimes the bears will get in, so we have to chase them off with a shotgun, and people being like, what? But it's, yeah.
I mean, when I was in high school, when I was like 15, I convinced my dad that I wanted to go camping by myself. I didn't really even have a concept of backpacking, but I was like, I want to go camping by myself in the wilderness. And I pestered him, and I was persistent, and he told me all these things I had to learn how to do, which was like make a fire, and boil water, and operate a compass and a map, even though I didn't have a map when I ultimately went. And I wore him down sufficiently, and he took me and he dropped me in the woods, and we tied like a piece of flagging tape to a tree, and he's like, be back here in 2 days. And then I left. And I didn't have a map. I didn't have an intention. I wasn't on a trail. Like, it's just the silliest start ever to this, what has become my life, which is this deep desire to go into the unknown and see what's there. And it's so funny because I think, it rained that first night. I started to feel like very fearful of like people in the woods, not bears, nothing else. I was like stuck in society mind still, which is a reasonable way to think about things, I think. But it was wild, and I made a little camp, and I journeyed away from the camp, and then I couldn't find the camp, and it was just 2 days that really shaped so much of who I became. And when he came back to get me, he was like, I was 100% certain that you got eaten by a bear. Like, what had I done? I was going to go to jail because like you were missing forever. No one would understand why I let you do this. Yeah. And it's such a, because I always think about like, oh, I had a rather pedestrian interaction with the outdoors growing up, but then I forget, like, we grew up in Montana, and however pedestrian it was, there was moose in our yard.
Totally.
Like, it's a wild place, and you interact with the wilderness just in urban areas as well.
Where did you go camping that time?
Oh my God, this is really funny. You'll think it's so funny. So he took me like up towards Upper Whitefish Lake, but not all the way, and he dropped me off at the spot. And when I left my camp and I went walking, I ended up coming back to the road and to a gravel pit where we used to have like parties in high school. And I was like, no, I don't like, I want to be in the wilderness. I don't want to be at like a keg.
Oh, that is so funny. I think I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just like, out in the woods
Yeah.
out there. I really wanted to go into the Bob Marshall.
Yeah.
That was like my vision. But, I think in that time it was like I would have to get bear spray, and bear spray costs a lot of money
Yeah.
and all the things.
I mean, Upper Whitefish is pretty wild. I mean, that's like grizzly
It's
territory
really
for
wild.
sure.
I know. I mean, it is amazing that nothing
Yeah.
bad happened. I mean, I also think that I had like a gallon jug of water in my like external frame backpack. Like I didn't have a concept of, oh, there's a creek and I'll get water from
Yeah.
the creek. I was like, I'm going to carry all my water. I just didn't know anything. And I look back at that time, and I think I tell folks this when they're like learning something new. Like we want to skip being a beginner because being a beginner is so uncomfortable. Innately, it feels so awkward to not know what you're doing. And I now look back so like nostalgically with a sadness for that. Like I'll never put a gallon jug of water in my backpack again and think that that's how I'm going to drink water.
Right.
Like I can never soak up the newness of just not knowing something in that realm. And so I try to seek it in other realms for sure.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
One thing I was curious about is like when we were growing up, this is like mid 90s. And a lot of our friends were like, Shane Mulder, Mark Delorme, who Mark says hi. I had lunch with him the other day. He and I hang out regularly.
Yeah.
But we were kind of like all skateboarders and snowboarders and skiers. And kind of back then it was like very male dominated. Like there weren't as many women coming up in the sports as there are now. Like, you see these like professional female skiers and snowboarders who are like ripping at the same level of men now.
Totally.
But there was definitely like a lot of, I think looking back and seeing how much misogyny just kind of naturally persisted that we did, thought was kind of normal.
Yeah.
So how is that seen? How have you like experienced that in the climbing community, and how has that changed? And especially because I think it's amazing that like what you've done is a great example for the next generation of women to look up to.
Yeah. It's really complicated, and it's a pretty uncomfortable thing to think about, I think, both for like other people and me in a way, because I'll start by saying I really appreciate that I am like a pretty average person. I'm like at the top of the middle or the back of the front in my like abilities of everything pretty much. And so to know that I could do this thing really shows me that like anybody could do anything in many ways. I really believe that. And I really appreciate that being a young, small female, it was really important to sort of like show up. And I get all the time, still to this day, as I mentioned before, like if I'm on an airplane, I usually don't say what my job is because it's like I won't be able to stop talking about it because it's interesting. I usually say I work at Starbucks. But if I do somehow get like found out, or I decide to just be honest because sometimes that's easier, I met so frequently with like, you are? And it, depending on what mood I'm in on any given day, it like deeply insults me, or I can kind of laugh about it too and be like, yeah, I know, I am, I'm a mountain guide, and yes, I climbed Everest 6 times, and I am the first American woman to climb without oxygen and survive. And so I know that like we have shifted, but it hasn't fully shifted, and for me, how I experienced it, and like this is the part that feels a little bit uncomfortable, but I think is really important to like just generally acknowledge, is that I came up in the climbing world as like a young, small, conventionally attractive white girl who was pretty well accepted by a bunch of dudes. Like a bunch of dudes were generally kind of happy to have me around as long as I played my role. And so my role is to be useful to them. And to be useful to them, I am like a object to court. I am a girlfriend. I am, somebody fun to hang out with. I'm not necessarily a competitor to the work they're trying to do. So I had this really challenging internal battle when I first started out, trying to figure out like, how do I fit into this place? And I watched it happen. I watched other women who took a pretty hard edge at like, I'm here on my competence, I'm here to do my job, and I watched them get like exiled further. And the brotherhood was like, stay away from her. And I didn't want that to be me, but I also saw like the girlfriend of a guy get talked about behind her back because it's like, oh, well, she's not like a real climber, she's just his girlfriend. And so I really felt like incredibly torn about how I could exist in this place that actually had profound meaning to me. And what I decided really early on was that I was gonna like act out my role as best I could to give me access to the places I wanted to be. And simultaneously, I was going to hone my craft to be so competent that nobody could question my skill set. And that even if they did, I would know I did the very best. I was the very best. And so even if the door opened because of some perception of my usefulness as a woman, that gets boring fast. A pretty girl is only pretty for as long as she's in front of you for the first time, and it gets boring. And so I kept showing up and kept rooting myself into my skill set and my competence and my desire. And again, I feel conflicted when I look back because I played this role. I often say some of the dirtiest jokes I ever heard in the beginning of working as a mountain guide came out of my mouth, and it was because of a deep desire to be included and be seen as worthy of being there. And I'm seeing it start to change. And I think one of the things that's pretty profound that can change it is people like myself being able to be honest and not feel ashamed of the role I chose to play. For my survival. It's not, I of course could have made better, I had some high and low character moments both, but in the big picture, I was trying to push this thing forward that I think I did. I think I moved it a little bit. And I do think that the young girls that I see working and the conversations that I hear happening are just a little bit more balanced. And just like you said, a lot of misogyny that is just out of not knowing any better, thinking that's the norm. And I think that as we start to change that gently and not wrap it in you, Morgan, are bad, it's no, we all collectively have fed this thing, and we all collectively now can undo it, but it's not going to feel good if we do it all at once. We can incrementally kind of undo it and make a better space of more belonging. And I don't know, the mountains and climbing and snowboarding culture at our time in high school, this is the idea of the kind of outcasts in a way, the people that didn't traditionally belong in the cool group. And there's something lovely about that, because those people are by far the most interesting people in the world. And to try to make the outcasts then have more filters of how you can belong is we can all kind of laugh at ourselves about that. There's just, we're just all these misfits that are broken in various ways and figuring it out and existing and feeling. And, it can be a really beautiful place if we can be a little vulnerable.
Exactly. The vulnerability part is such a huge part of it. Being vulnerable to yourself is one of the hardest things to do. Yeah. But to be able to take that and apply it to something extraordinary is really a profound personal human experience.
Yeah, and I have experienced that for sure. That's
incredible. So what are you doing now? So you're still guiding, but so tell me about what you do now and what's life like being a parent and guiding and all that good stuff. It's great.
So good. I feel bad in some ways, weirdly, that my life is so good and that I get to have this life. And of course, I feel like I paid some dues in different ways to get here. But
you sure have.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So I have a business that I run with my husband. It's called Pacific Alpine Guides, and we do two different kind of sects of our business. One is the mountain guiding side, and that's my work primarily. So alpine guiding in the U.S., international, 7 summits type guiding, expedition prep, and then he specializes in ski mountaineering. So some heli skiing, but really human-powered skiing objectives. He's on a sailboat right now in Greenland, where they're just motoring up to glaciers and skinning up and skiing down and doing really cool trips like that.
Sick. So that's amazing.
And we have 2 kids. I have a 2-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter, and we trade off what we like to refer to as parenting season and work season. And so winter tends to be winter and early spring is his work season, and it's my parenting season, where I'm primarily the one home with the kids and responsible for the connectedness with them. And then we're getting ready to shift, usually around June, and I go into working in the mountains, and he starts his parenting season, and that kind of persists through early fall. And so we have that balance, and then I'm doing work with the Juniper Fund still, and I just finished writing a book that will be out next April.
Oh, and, amazing.
Which has been really a fun project to sort of really be intentional about the story that I want to tell, because so often I feel like my story has been told for me by the people who wanted it told in a specific way, and it'll be an opportunity for me to tell sort of my whole story.
I mean, there's just talking to you, and I'm she needs to release a book ASAP.
Yeah.
was literally what I was thinking.
If I could make it be out right now, I would. But,
Yeah.
election yearbooks that aren't about politics are like not a thing. So
Oh gosh. Ugh, that makes me want to run into the mountains and just
I know.
hide.
I know. The thought of it. Same.
Yeah. What are like, let's end on some fun questions. Like,
Yeah.
what are your, if you're just going to go like hiking glacier, what are your top three things you're going to find in your backpack that are like, these are three things that I've found are just so awesome. Maybe unconventional items that are just like, I have to have these like three things or two things in my backpack whenever I go out.
So I'm severely addicted to just like gummy candy in general. So I always have an obscene amount of weight in my pack allocated towards like gummy bears, cinnamon bears, like Sour Patch watermelons, that sort of thing.
Nice.
So it's not conventional, but it's for me like incredibly mandatory. Let me think of something that's maybe like outside of the norm that I always have. I mean, one of my trademarks for sure is like my double headband buff life. Like I always have my face covered with a buff and my headband just because I'm lazy and I don't like to do anything other than just keep my hair on my face and keep the sun off of me. And it's kind of like become truly one of my hallmarks. And then lately it seems like, I mean, you'll recognize I always have like one of these in my pack because children want their stuffies to go to the summit too.
I think we have that exact same one. Yeah.
Yeah. This is Sparkle Kitty. She's got
hilarious.
Some sparkly earrings too. So
I think Magnolia has that exact same one. I think I woke up next to it this morning.
Yeah, exactly. So
So funny. The gummies is a good one too, because you kind of get a little bit of a dopamine kick from the sugars, which I think is probably important just to kind of like alleviate that stress when you're up there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love food. I'm like pretty regimented about eating and drinking when I'm in the mountains. I like work on an hour time frame. I'll move for an hour and then stop for like 10 or 15 minutes and eat and drink and sunscreen and do all the take it all in, and then like another hour down. So it's kind of a good trick for endurance.
That's awesome. Do you ever get back to Montana? Are your folks still in this area or?
No, they moved a couple of years ago. They're in Montana right now.
Cool.
At my grandfather's house. But yeah, so I do get back. It was fun. A couple years ago, I brought my daughter and we stayed up at La Condo at the big mountain and or whatever, Whitefish Mountain Resort.
Yeah.
And we stayed up there and she like went to the like day. She was, like, I don't know, 1 year old or something. And she went to the daycare and I was with friends that had kids and we all like skied all day. And then I like went and got her and like skinned up on the little slope that I could with her in the backpack and skied. And it was really a weird and fun way to experience Whitefish as like a tourist. And, I was like driving over the viaduct, just thinking of the hundreds of times that I walked home from school and I found 5 in the same place on the base of the viaduct over the years, which is wild. So it was fun to be able to see it. And then I also, in the years that I was teaching wilderness medicine, I was based in Montana. So I lived in both Missoula and Bozeman for many, many years. And I got to come up to Glacier National Park and actually live inside the park teaching EMT courses in the spring, which was like such a gift, and being able to just be up near Pole Bridge and stuff. So it's fun. It has my husband and I, it was on the list of places we considered moving, when we got married and we were trying to figure out how our life would shape up. And it has a really great nostalgia to me, and I don't come back nearly often enough, but I certainly would like to, and it's really fun. I mean, I bless social media because like folks like you and Shane that I get to keep in contact with. I just sent Shane a picture that I found of us like at a party someday, and
that's amazing.
I sent it to him and he was like, A1 from day one, very Mulder.
Oh, he's great.
And,
I've been fortunate to keep in touch with him, and he's rocking the Nate Shoe Foundation and the Nate Shoe Classic every year, and it's really been awesome to come back and see how the mountain has really grown. The ski resort's done a great job of like, they really except like the uphill skiing, the skinning up has become a huge thing. And just like the amount of terrain that like I'm just discovering for the first time, like Mark and I hit the canyon a couple times this year, and it's just like there's so much incredible terrain that you can access. So it's really been cool to see the mountain grow and still maintain its independence and stuff.
For sure.
So it's It's cool. It's fun to be back here. I was kind of like you, like, I moved to California and was so excited to get away from Montana, and then I came back in, mid 2015, and I was just like, dude, this is the spot. It's so incredible.
Amazing.
Yeah, just to be able to see it, like you said, with fresh eyes for the first time, and just to understand like how remarkably beautiful and sacred this place is, and how grateful I am that we all got to grow up here in the time frame that we did.
I completely agree. I think I would give back my high school experience,
Totally.
but being like so many people would.
Yep.
But the gift of being in Whitefish and being surrounded by a small community and the mountains and, people that were doing such really cool things and really quietly, it just has, it permeates your DNA. When people ask where I'm from, I always say Montana. I always say Whitefish, and something that feels like a really important part of who I have become.
Totally. High school was weird.
It
was so bizarre, and I'm so grateful for our friend group, but strange times for sure.
Yeah, I got a message from a high school bully some years past when they had gotten wind of my Everest stuff, and it's remarkable how you cannot be in high school anymore and see certain names and feel exactly the same as you did when you were in high school. I'm like, I'm an adult who has done a lot of therapy. I should not be affected by this.
Oh, that's incredible. Awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave all these links in the show notes, but we've got the juniperfund.org if anyone would like to donate. I am definitely going to be following up with you about that. I think that's an extraordinary fund. You have the Pacific Alpine Guides if anyone wants to reach out about guiding. And then next year, you'll be having your book out, which I will definitely make sure I buy a couple copies so that I can give some away on the show. I think it's an incredible opportunity to share your story. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and have this amazing conversation today. This is one for the record books for sure.
This is a delight. When your email came through, I was like, I would love to do nothing more than this. So thank you, Morgan. And thanks for being you. It's really nice to know that there's these anchors of people out there in the world that are just, being themselves and doing really good. And so I really appreciate you.
Oh, I appreciate you too, Melissa. This is really great to reconnect. And if you guys ever come out here, definitely hit us up. We'll get the kids together and hang out.
Yeah, it would be perfect. Just the crazy chaos of the kids zoo.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.